The bitter wind lashed against Eleanor Decker's face as she stumbled through knee-deep snow, each labored breath visible in the frigid December air of 1879. Blood trickled from her split lip, mingling with the tears that froze against her cheeks. Behind her lay the grand house she'd called prison for 3 years, and somewhere within it, Harrison Decker would be awakening to find his wife gone, and his rage would know no bounds. Eleanor had waited until her husband collapsed into a drunken slumber before fleeing into the Wyoming winter night with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's locket clutched in her trembling hand. The bruises on her ribs made each step agony, but the thought of returning to Harrison's discipline drove her forward through the blinding snowfall. She had married Harrison at 19, dazzled by his wealth and charm, never suspecting the monster beneath the polished exterior of one of Cheyenne's most respected businessmen. Now, at 22, she was running for her life, heading north toward nothing but wilderness and the faint hope of escape. The wind picked up, howling through the pines like a vengeful spirit. Eleanor's thin coat provided little protection against the biting cold. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and her legs moved mechanically through the mounting drifts. The darkness began to swim before her eyes as exhaustion and cold threatened to claim her. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, though she had no destination in mind. Anywhere was better than the hell she'd left behind. The crack of a branch breaking somewhere to her left startled her. Eleanor froze, straining to hear over the howling wind. Had Harrison found her so quickly? Panic surged through her veins as she tried to run, but her legs betrayed her, tangling in her sodden skirts as she tumbled face first into the snow. "Whoa there," a deep voice called out, followed by the crunch of boots approaching through the snow. "Madam, are you all right?" Eleanor scrambled backward, terror making her movements frantic and uncoordinated. A tall figure emerged from the swirling snow, leading a horse by its reins. The brim of his hat was pulled low against the wind, but she could make out a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. "Stay back," she cried, voice cracking with fear. "Please, just let me go." The stranger stopped, raising one gloved hand in a placating gesture. "I ain't gonna hurt you, madam. I'm just passing through, heading to my cabin up yonder." He tilted his head, taking in her disheveled appearance, the blood on her face. "You're hurt, and you'll freeze to death out here alone." Eleanor tried to stand but collapsed again, her strength finally deserting her. The man approached cautiously, kneeling in the snow before her. When he pushed back his hat, she saw kind eyes in a weathered face. "Name's Daniel Blackburn, madam. Most folks call me Dan." He shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it was immediate and overwhelming. "Whatever you're running from, you won't get far in this weather. My cabin's about an hour's ride from here. I can get you warm, patch you up, and come morning you can be on your way if that's what you want." Eleanor stared at him, weighing her options, death in the snow or trust in a stranger. Neither seemed promising. "How do I know you're not worse than what I'm fleeing?" she whispered. Daniel's expression softened. "You don't, but I give you my word as a man that no harm will come to you under my protection." He extended his hand, steady and patient. "I won't ask what you're running from, or even your name if you don't want to give it, but I can't in good conscience leave a woman alone to die in this blizzard." The sincerity in his eyes broke something loose in Eleanor's chest. She placed her trembling hand in his and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Eleanor," she said softly. "My name is Eleanor Decker." Daniel nodded once, then guided her to his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding who snorted impatiently in the cold. "This is Buck. He's strong enough to carry us both." With surprising gentleness for his large frame, Daniel lifted Eleanor onto the saddle, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "Hang on, Miss Eleanor. I've got you now." As they rode through the worsening storm, Eleanor found herself leaning back against Daniel's solid chest, his warmth seeping into her frozen bones. For the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't safety, not yet, but it was possibility. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow like a mirage, small but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. Daniel had explained that he'd ridden ahead to his property earlier in the day to stoke the fire before returning to Wheatland for supplies. "Home, sweet home," he said as he dismounted, then reached up to help Eleanor down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and Daniel caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. "Let's get you inside." The cabin's interior was sparse but clean. A fire roared in the stone hearth, casting golden light across the simple furnishings: a table with 2 chairs, a chest of drawers, shelves lined with books and provisions, and a bed tucked in the corner. A bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor, and various tools hung from hooks on the walls. Daniel set Eleanor gently in a chair near the fire, then moved to tend to his horse. When he returned, he carried his saddlebags and a canteen of water. "You should drink," he said, offering the canteen. "Then I'll see to that cut on your lip." Eleanor accepted the water gratefully, only now realizing how parched she was. As she drank, Daniel busied himself at the stove, setting a kettle to boil. "I've got some stew I can heat up," he said, his back to her. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot and filling." "Thank you," Eleanor managed, her voice little more than a whisper. The reality of her situation was beginning to settle in. She had fled with nothing: no money, no clothes beyond what she wore, no plan, and now she was alone in a cabin with a man she'd just met. The absurdity of it struck her suddenly, and a hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, quickly transforming into a sob. Daniel turned, concern etching his features. He approached slowly, kneeling before her chair. From his pocket, he withdrew a clean handkerchief, offering it without comment. Eleanor took it, pressing it against her eyes. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "You must think me utterly mad." "I think you're in trouble," he replied simply, "and I think someone hurt you who had no right to." She lowered the handkerchief, studying him. Daniel Blackburn was older than her, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and crow's feet at the corners of his eyes. His hair, what she could see beneath his hat, was dark brown, as was the stubble on his jaw. He wasn't conventionally handsome like Harrison, but there was something compelling about his steady gaze and the quiet confidence with which he moved. "My husband," she admitted finally. "I ran from my husband." Daniel nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "I figured as much." "Man who'd strike his wife isn't much of a man at all. He'll come looking for me," Eleanor said, fear creeping back into her voice. "Harrison doesn't let go of what he considers his." "Well, he'll have a hard time tracking you in this storm," Daniel replied, rising to check the kettle. "And by first light, the snow will have covered your tracks completely." He poured hot water into a basin, adding a splash of whiskey from a bottle on the shelf. "Let me clean that cut for you." Eleanor sat still as Daniel gently dabbed at her split lip with a cloth dampened in the warm mixture. His touch was careful, almost reverent, so unlike Harrison's brutal hands. "Are you some kind of doctor?" she asked, noticing the methodical way he worked. A shadow passed across Daniel's face. "No, madam, learned some field medicine during the war, enough to patch up what needs patching." "You fought in the war, with which side?" "Union, Wisconsin's 6th Infantry." He set aside the cloth and inspected his work. "The bleeding stopped, but it'll be tender for a few days." Eleanor touched her lip gingerly. "Thank you." Daniel nodded, then moved to the stove to stir the pot of stew. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I've got a spare shirt and trousers that'll be too big, but they're dry." She stiffened, immediately wary, sensing her discomfort. Daniel retrieved the clothes and laid them on the bed, then headed toward the door. "I need to check on Buck and get some more firewood. Take your time. There's a screen in the corner you can change behind if you'd prefer." Once alone, Eleanor moved quickly, stripping off her sodden dress and petticoats. Her corset was damp as well, but she hesitated to remove it. It seemed too intimate, too vulnerable. In the end, practicality won out. She couldn't risk falling ill from the cold. She changed into Daniel's offered clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs several times. The rough cotton felt strange against her skin, but the blessed dryness was worth the impropriety. When Daniel returned with an armload of firewood, Eleanor was seated by the fire again, his clothes hanging comically on her slender frame. She draped her wet garments over the screen to dry. "Better?" he asked, stoking the fire. Yes, thank you. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly shy. I don't know how I'll repay your kindness. Daniel served the stew in wooden bowls, placing one before her with a hunk of crusty bread. No need, I wasn't raised to leave folks in distress. He settled into the chair opposite her. Eat, you'll need your strength. They ate in companionable silence, the howling wind outside making the cabin's warmth feel all the more precious. The stew was simple venison, potatoes, and carrots, but to Eleanor, who hadn't eaten since noon the previous day, it was ambrosia. How long have you lived out here? She asked eventually, curiosity overcoming her caution. Going on 5 years now, Daniel replied. Came west after the war. Tried my hand at several things: cattle driving, mining, even shop-keeping for a spell in Laramie. Nothing fit right until I found this place. And what do you do now, for a living, I mean? Daniel's lips quirked in a small smile. Little of everything. Hunt, trap, do odd jobs in Wheatland when needed. I break horses for some of the ranchers in the territory. He shrugged. It's a simple life, but it's mine. It sounds peaceful, Eleanor murmured, a note of wistfulness in her voice. Most days. He studied her for a moment. What about you? Before you ended up in the snow, Eleanor's hands tightened around her bowl. I was a school teacher before I married Harrison. I loved it. The memory of her small classroom in Denver brought a genuine smile to her face. Teaching children to read, watching them discover the world through books. There's nothing quite like it. You're from Colorado, she nodded. Denver. Harrison was there on business. He courted me for 3 months before proposing. My parents were thrilled, a wealthy businessman wanting their daughter. Who would say no? Her smile faded. He waited until after the wedding to show his true nature. Daniel's expression darkened. I'm sorry. It's not your burden to bear. Eleanor set aside her empty bowl. But I thank you for listening. It's been a long time since anyone has. You should rest, Daniel said, rising to take their dishes to the wash basin. Take the bed, I'll sleep by the fire. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he interrupted gently. You've been through enough tonight. A proper rest will do you good. Too exhausted to argue, Eleanor made her way to the bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw and covered with several woolen blankets and a handmade quilt. She sank onto it gratefully, her body suddenly aware of every bruise and ache. Daniel busied himself making a pallet on the floor near the hearth, his back to her to provide privacy. Eleanor watched him through heavy-lidded eyes, this strange, kind man who had appeared like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to voice. Mr. Blackburn, she called softly. He turned, eyebrows raised in question. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Daniel nodded once, his expression gentle. Sleep well, Miss Eleanor, you're safe here. As she drifted toward sleep, Eleanor wondered if she could trust those words. But for the first time in 3 long years, she allowed herself to hope they might be true. The storm raged through the night, rattling the cabin windows and howling down the chimney. Eleanor woke several times, momentarily disoriented before remembering where she was. Each time she saw Daniel still awake, feeding the fire or simply sitting, staring into the flames with a faraway look in his eyes. When morning came, it brought with it an eerie silence. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside hushed beneath a fresh blanket of snow. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden squares across the plank floor. Eleanor opened her eyes to find Daniel already up and moving about the cabin, preparing what smelled like coffee. He'd put on a fresh shirt and combed his hair, though his jaw was still shadowed with stubble. Morning, he said, noticing she was awake. How are you feeling? Eleanor sat up, mentally cataloging her various pains. Her ribs still ached and her muscles protested every movement, but the bone-deep cold was gone. Better, she replied, though I fear I've imposed on you long enough. Daniel poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. No imposition, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. That's very generous, but she accepted the coffee, inhaling its rich aroma. Harrison will be looking for me. I can't stay in one place too long. Where will you go? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Eleanor had no real plan beyond escape. She had no money, no possessions, no friends she could turn to without putting them in danger from Harrison's wrath. I don't know, she admitted finally. West, perhaps, California or Oregon. Somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. That's a long journey for a woman alone, especially in winter. I have no choice. There's always a choice, he replied, moving to the stove to prepare a simple breakfast of flapjacks. But no need to decide anything right this minute. Weather's clear today, but there's more snow in those clouds on the horizon. Might be best to wait it out here. Eleanor knew she should refuse, should insist on moving on immediately, but the thought of venturing back into the cold with no destination was daunting. And something about Daniel's quiet presence made her reluctant to leave. Perhaps just until tomorrow, she conceded. They ate breakfast together, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Daniel told her about the wildlife in the area, the best spots for fishing in the spring, the neighbors few and far between who he occasionally traded with. Eleanor found herself laughing at his dry observations, tension gradually easing from her shoulders. After breakfast, Daniel announced he needed to check his trap lines and tend to buck. I won't be gone long. Make yourself at home. Once alone, Eleanor explored the cabin more thoroughly. Daniel lived simply but with unexpected touches of refinement. His books included not just practical guides to hunting and trapping, but also volumes of Thoreau, Emerson, and surprisingly, several novels by women authors. On a small table near the bed sat a daguerreotype in a simple frame. Eleanor picked it up carefully, studying the image of a young woman with a serious expression and eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and sorrow. My sister, Elizabeth. Eleanor startled, nearly dropping the photograph. She hadn't heard Daniel return. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. It's all right, he said, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. His cheeks and nose were red from the cold. She died of typhoid fever back in '67. She was all the family I had left after our parents passed. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said softly, returning the photograph to its place. She was beautiful. She was stubborn as a mule and twice as opinionated, Daniel replied with a fond smile. But yes, she was beautiful, inside and out. Something in his tone made Eleanor's throat tighten. This man who lived alone in the wilderness carried grief just as she carried fear. Perhaps that explained his kindness to a stranger. Were you married? She asked. Before, Daniel shook his head. No, came close once before the war, but she couldn't wait, and I can't say I blame her. He busied himself removing his boots. 4 years is a long time to ask someone to put their life on hold, and after, he glanced up, a shadow crossing his features. After I wasn't fit company for anyone for a long while, by the time I might have been, I'd grown used to my own company. He straightened, changing the subject. Traplines were empty, too cold for even the critters to be out, but I brought in more firewood. The day passed quietly. Eleanor helped Daniel with small chores around the cabin, grateful for the distraction. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm that required little conversation. By evening, she had darned 2 pairs of his socks, helped prepare a rabbit stew, and even assisted in repairing a tear in his spare coat. As they sat by the fire that night, Eleanor found herself studying Daniel's profile, illuminated by the dancing flames. There was something reassuring about his solid presence, his undemanding company. In 3 years of marriage to Harrison, she'd never felt as comfortable as she did after 2 days with this stranger. What will you do? Daniel asked suddenly, breaking the companionable silence. If you make it to California or Oregon, what will you do there? Eleanor considered the question. Teach, I suppose, if I can find a position. It's what I know. Daniel nodded. You'd be good at it. You have a patient way about you. Thank you. She smiled, then sobered. But first I have to get there. And before that, I have to find a way to disappear so thoroughly that Harrison can never find me. Your husband, Daniel said carefully, is he powerful enough to have connections that far west? Harrison has business associates everywhere, Eleanor replied, a familiar fear creeping into her voice. He owns shares in mining operations all across the territories, and he's friends with judges, lawmen, people who could make trouble for me. On what grounds? You're his wife, not his property. Eleanor laughed bitterly. In the eyes of the law, there's little difference. And Harrison would claim I'm unstable, that I stole from him, anything to justify bringing me back. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. There might be a way, he said finally. If he believes you're dead, he'd stop looking. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. What are you suggesting? Nothing sinister, Daniel assured her quickly. Just a deception. The storm we had, it was fierce enough to claim lives if evidence were found suggesting you perished in it. What kind of evidence? Something personal, distinctive. Daniel's gaze fell to the locket around her neck. Like that, perhaps. Eleanor's hand flew protectively to the silver oval. This was my mother's. It's all I have left of her. I understand, Daniel said gently. It was just a thought. They fell silent again, each lost in their own reflections. Outside, the wind was picking up again, whistling around the cabin's corners. I should go to bed, Eleanor said finally, rising from her chair. Thank you for the company and for everything. Daniel remained by the fire as Eleanor settled onto the bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind churning with possibilities and fears. Harrison would be searching for her already. How long before his reach extended this far? How long could she impose on Daniel's hospitality? And beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper unease. She was starting to care for this quiet, kind man who had rescued her from the snow. Starting to trust him in a way she'd sworn never to trust a man again. It was dangerous not just for her heart, but perhaps for her very survival. Morning dawned cold and clear. The world outside transformed into a sparkling wonderland of pristine snow and ice crystal trees. Eleanor awoke to find Daniel already gone. A note on the table informing her he'd gone to check his traplines again and would return by midday. She took advantage of the solitude to properly wash herself with heated water from the kettle, wincing at the mosaic of bruises that covered her torso, Harrison's parting gift. Some were already fading to sickly yellow, but others remained vivid purple against her pale skin. After dressing in her own now dry clothes, Eleanor decided to make herself useful. She swept the cabin floor, tidied what little needed tidying, and prepared biscuit dough for their midday meal. The simple domestic tasks calmed her mind, and for brief moments, she almost forgot the precariousness of her situation. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sometime before noon sent her heart racing. She moved to the window, relief flooding her when she recognized Daniel's broad-shouldered figure astride Buck. But he wasn't alone. A second horse followed, its rider bundled against the cold. Fear clutched at Eleanor's throat. Had Daniel betrayed her after all? Was this someone sent by Harrison? She backed away from the window, frantically searching the cabin for somewhere to hide or something to use as a weapon. But before she could act, the door swung open and Daniel entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Eleanor," he called, his voice tight with urgency, "we have a visitor." A woman followed him inside, older, perhaps in her 50s, with iron-gray hair tucked beneath a woolen hat and shrewd eyes that immediately took in every detail of the cabin and Eleanor herself. "This is Mrs. Martha Jenkins," Daniel explained. "She runs the general store in Wheatland with her husband." Eleanor stood frozen, uncertain whether to greet this stranger or run. "So you're the one," Mrs. Jenkins said, her piercing gaze softening slightly. Daniel came into town asking some mighty peculiar questions about a woman's garments and such, figured there had to be a story behind it. She unwound the scarf from her neck. "Don't worry, child, I'm not here to cause trouble, quite the opposite." Daniel closed the door behind them. "Mrs. Jenkins is discreet and she might be able to help." "Help how?" Eleanor asked warily. The older woman removed her coat, revealing a sturdy frame clad in practical dark wool. "Daniel tells me you're in a difficult situation, running from a husband who treats you ill." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Unfortunately, not an uncommon tale, but perhaps together we can write a better ending for yours." Over the next hour, as they shared the meal Eleanor had prepared, Mrs. Jenkins outlined a plan so audacious that it left Eleanor breathless. "My sister lives in Oregon," the older woman explained, "near Portland. She's been asking me to send her a companion, someone to help with her children and the household. The position comes with room, board, and a small salary." Mrs. Jenkins leveled her gaze at Eleanor. It would be a fresh start, far from Wyoming territory. But how would I get there? Eleanor asked. And what about Harrison? He won't simply let me vanish. That's where the rest of the plan comes in, Daniel said quietly. If Harrison Decker believes his wife perished in the blizzard. Mrs. Jenkins nodded. Precisely. Daniel will plant evidence your locket, perhaps a torn piece of your dress near Bitter Creek, where the spring thaw often reveals unfortunate discoveries. Meanwhile, she continued, you'll stay hidden first with me and Thomas above our store until the search dies down, then with the Wilkinsons at their ranch outside town until spring, when you can join a wagon train heading west. Eleanor's mind whirled with the implications. You would do this for a stranger. Why? Mrs. Jenkins' expression hardened. Because 20 years ago I was you, different name, different husband, same story. Someone helped me then. I'm simply passing on the kindness. And what of my identity? Won't I need papers, references? Already thought of, Daniel said. Mrs. Jenkins' cousin was a teacher in Nebraska who passed away last autumn. No family to speak of. With a few carefully placed letters, Eleanor Decker will become Emily Davis, Mrs. Jenkins supplied. A respectable widow traveling west to take up a position with family. Eleanor felt dizzy with possibility. A new name, a new life, freedom from Harrison's shadow. It seemed too good to be true, which made her instinctively wary. What if we're caught? She whispered. The punishment for such deception we won't be, Daniel said with quiet confidence. Harrison Decker may be powerful, but his reach has limits, and the wilderness keeps its secrets well. Eleanor closed her eyes, her hand going to the locket at her throat. Could she do this? Abandon her name, her past, everything she'd been. Then again, what was there to hold on to? Her life with Harrison had been nothing but pain and fear. Her parents were gone, her few friends distant memories. I need to think, she said finally. Mrs. Jenkins nodded understandingly. Of course. But not too long. The storm has kept folks close to home, but soon they'll be moving about again. Questions will be asked. She rose, gathering her things. I should return to town before Thomas worries. Daniel knows how to reach me when you've decided. After the older woman departed, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Daniel busied himself with small tasks, giving Eleanor space to process the momentous choice before her. As the afternoon light waned, Eleanor finally spoke. If I do this, become this Emily Davis, I can never go back. Never contact anyone from my old life. I would be erasing myself. Daniel paused in his work, turning to face her. Yes, but you would also be creating yourself anew, on your own terms. And you, she asked softly, what do you gain from helping me? Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite name. The knowledge that I did right by someone who needed it. Eleanor studied him, this man who had become, improbably, her protector and friend in the span of 3 days. There was more he wasn't saying, she sensed. But she also sensed no deceit in him, no hidden agenda beyond what he'd stated. I need one more night, she said finally. To be sure, Daniel nodded. Take all the time you need. That night, as they sat by the fire sharing a simple supper, the air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Eleanor found herself watching Daniel's hands as he whittled a small piece of pine wood into the shape of a bird, his movements precise and patient. What made you stop that night? She asked suddenly. In the snow, you could have ridden past me. Daniel's hands stilled. Couldn't have lived with myself if I had. Is it that simple for you, doing the right thing? A faint smile touched his lips. No, but trying to is the only way I know to make peace with the past. The war, she guessed. He nodded, resuming his carving. Saw and did things no man should, came back different. Took a long time to find my way to something resembling normal again. His eyes met hers. We all have ghosts, Eleanor. Some just make more noise than others. In that moment, looking into his steady gaze, Eleanor made her decision. I'll do it, she said quietly. I'll become Emily Davis. Relief washed over Daniel's features. You're making the right choice. I hope so. She twisted the locket between her fingers. But I can't give you this. Not even to plant as evidence. We'll find something else, he assured her. Something Harrison will recognize without question. Eleanor thought for a moment, then reached up to unpin a small brooch from her collar, a silver filigree piece with a pearl center. This. Harrison gave it to me on our first anniversary. He'd know it anywhere. Her lip curled in bitter memory. He was always very particular about my wearing it when we were in public, to show off his generosity. Daniel accepted the brooch, tucking it carefully into his pocket. This will work perfectly. How soon must I leave here? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the reluctance in her voice. Tomorrow, Daniel replied, regret evident in his tone. Mrs. Jenkins will send her husband with the wagon, as if making deliveries. You'll be hidden beneath the supplies. The reality of it struck Eleanor suddenly. Tomorrow she would leave this cabin, this unexpected haven, leave Daniel. A wave of emotion rose in her chest, catching her off guard with its intensity. I don't know how to thank you, she managed. Daniel set aside his carving and leaned forward, his expression earnest. Live well, Eleanor, be happy, that's all the thanks I need. She held his gaze, seeing in it something that mirrored the confusion in her own heart, in another life, under different circumstances, perhaps. But such thoughts were dangerous. Eleanor had learned the hard way that romantic notions led to disaster. Even if Daniel Blackburn was nothing like Harrison Decker, she couldn't afford to trust her judgment where men were concerned. Not again. I should prepare for tomorrow, she said, breaking the moment. That night, lying in Daniel's bed for what would be the last time, Eleanor listened to his steady breathing across the room and tried to imagine the path that lay before her. Oregon, a new name, a new life. Freedom, but also solitude and the constant fear of discovery. For the first time, she wondered if there might be another way. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor had slept little, her mind too full of tomorrow's uncertainties to find rest. She rose quietly, determined not to wake Daniel, only to find him already up, coffee brewing on the stove. You're awake early, she observed. He turned, a shadow of something like sadness crossing his features before he masked it with a small smile. Wanted to make sure everything's ready for your journey. They moved around each other in the small cabin, sharing the morning meal in companionable silence. Eleanor had nothing to pack. She would be leaving as she had arrived, with only the clothes on her back. But Mrs. Jenkins had promised to provide necessities once Eleanor reached town safely. As they waited for the Jenkins wagon, Daniel presented her with the small carved bird he'd been working on the night before. A keepsake, he said gruffly. Nothing valuable, but... Eleanor closed her fingers around the wooden figure, emotion welling in her throat. It's perfect, thank you. The sound of an approaching wagon sent them both to the window. Mr. Jenkins had arrived as promised, his wagon loaded with supplies that would conceal Eleanor on the return journey. Time to go, Daniel said softly. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her chest. This man had saved her life, had offered her a chance at freedom without asking anything in return. Leaving him felt wrong somehow, as if she were abandoning something precious before it had a chance to begin. Daniel helped her into her coat, her own, now dry and brushed clean. Their eyes met as he adjusted the collar, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. Daniel, you'll be safe with the Jenkins, he interrupted gently. They're good people, and once you reach Oregon, you can build whatever life you choose. Eleanor swallowed hard. Will I see you again before I leave for Oregon? A shadow passed over his face. Better not. The less connection between us, the safer for you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small pouch. It's not much, but it should help with your journey west. I can't take your money, Eleanor protested. You can and you will, Daniel insisted, pressing the pouch into her hand. Consider it an investment in Emily Davis's future. A knock at the door signaled Mr. Jenkins's arrival. The shopkeeper was a round, cheerful man whose eyes crinkled with kindness as he greeted Eleanor. Ready, Mrs. Decker, or should I say Miss Davis? He asked with a conspiratorial wink. Ready, Eleanor replied, though her heart argued otherwise. The loading of the wagon was accomplished quickly. Eleanor would lie hidden beneath canvas and supplies until they were well away from the area. then sit up front with Mr. Jenkins for the remainder of the journey to Wheatland. As she prepared to climb into her hiding place, Eleanor turned to Daniel one last time. "I'll never forget what you've done for me," she said softly. Daniel's expression was unreadable. "Be well, Eleanor, be free." On impulse, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a swift kiss to his cheek. Then, before her courage failed her, she allowed Mr. Jenkins to help her into the wagon and settle the concealing canvas over her. As the wagon pulled away from the cabin, Eleanor clutched the wooden bird tightly in her hand and tried not to think of all she was leaving behind. The journey to Wheatland passed in a blur of discomfort and anxiety. Eleanor remained hidden until Mr. Jenkins deemed it safe for her to emerge, her limbs stiff and cramped from the confined space. The remainder of the trip was spent in stilted conversation, with Mr. Jenkins filling her in on the town they were approaching and his wife's preparations for Eleanor's arrival. "Martha's fixed up the room above the storeroom," he explained. "It's small but private. No one comes up there but family." "You're taking a terrible risk," Eleanor said. "If Harrison discovers what you've done." Mr. Jenkins's round face grew serious. "Some things are worth the risk, Mrs. Decker. Martha told me your story. Reminds me of her sister's situation years back. We don't hold with men who mistreat their wives. Never have." Wheatland appeared on the horizon as the afternoon light began to fade, a small but thriving community nestled in a valley, with smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of snow-covered hills. Mr. Jenkins guided the wagon around the outskirts, approaching the general store from the rear alley to avoid curious eyes. Mrs. Jenkins was waiting at the back door, ushering Eleanor quickly inside and up a narrow staircase to the promised room. It was indeed small, just space for a bed, a washstand, and a trunk for clothing, but to Eleanor it represented safety. "You'll stay here until we're certain the search has moved on," Mrs. Jenkins explained. "I've put together some clothes that should fit well enough, and there's hot water for washing." "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," Eleanor began, but the older woman waved away her thanks. "Just live well, child, that's payment enough." The next several days passed in quiet seclusion. Eleanor remained in her tiny room, emerging only when the store was closed and the Jenkins assured her it was safe. She spent her time helping Martha with inventory and account books, grateful for the distraction from her thoughts, which too often strayed to a certain cabin and its solitary occupant. On the fourth day of her stay, Mr. Jenkins returned from his supply run to Cheyenne with troubling news. "Harrison Decker's in the territory," he reported grimly over supper. "Has men searching everywhere for his beloved wife who wandered off during the storm." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "He's here, in Wheatland?" "Not yet, but word is he's working his way north from Cheyenne, offering rewards for information." Mrs. Jenkins reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's trembling hand. "Don't fret, the plan is still sound. Daniel planted the brooch yesterday, near where Bitter Creek runs fast enough to stay unfrozen. Come spring thaw, it will be discovered along with other evidence suggesting you were caught in the storm. But until then," Eleanor whispered. "Until then, we move you to the Wilkinsons' ranch as planned," Mr. Jenkins replied. "It's isolated and they rarely receive visitors in winter. You'll be safer there than here in town." 2 days later, bundled in borrowed clothes and hidden in the back of yet another wagon, Eleanor bid farewell to the Jenkins and began the journey to her next hiding place. The Wilkinson Ranch lay some 15 miles outside of Wheatland, a modest operation run by a middle-aged couple and their grown son. Sarah Wilkinson proved to be a taciturn woman with capable hands and few questions, while her husband James spoke even less. Their son Robert, a strapping young man of 25 with a shock of straw-colored hair, regarded Eleanor with undisguised curiosity, but respected his mother's stern warning to keep their guests' presence confidential. Life at the ranch settled into a quiet routine. Eleanor helped Sarah with household tasks, learning to make soap and candles, to preserve meat, and to bake bread in the ranch's large kitchen. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her constant fear of discovery. Days stretched into weeks as January gave way to February. The snow remained deep, effectively isolating the ranch from casual visitors. Eleanor began to breathe a little easier, to sleep through the night without startling awake at every sound. And then one evening, as the family gathered around the supper table, the sound of approaching riders shattered her fragile peace. Who could that be in this weather? Sarah wondered, moving to the window. James rose, reaching for the rifle that hung above the door. Robert, take Mrs. Decker to the root cellar. Now. Eleanor didn't need to be told twice. She followed Robert through the kitchen and down the narrow steps into the cool darkness of the underground cellar. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it could be heard through the floorboards above. "It'll be all right, madam," Robert whispered, his young face serious in the dim light of the lamp he carried. "Pa won't let anyone harm you." Eleanor nodded mutely, straining to hear the muffled voices overhead. Minutes stretched endlessly as she huddled among barrels of preserved vegetables and hanging bunches of dried herbs, imagining Harrison's cold eyes and cruel smile as he searched for her. When footsteps finally sounded on the cellar steps, Eleanor pressed herself against the earthen wall, terror closing her throat. But it was Sarah who appeared, her lined face drawn with concern. "It's safe to come up," she said, "but there's news you need to hear." Upstairs, two snow-dusted figures stood warming themselves by the fire. Mr. Jenkins, and to Eleanor's shock, Daniel Blackburn. "Daniel," she exclaimed, forgetting herself for a moment. "What are you doing here?" His eyes met hers, dark with an emotion she couldn't name. "Harrison Decker knows you're alive," he said without preamble. "Someone saw Jenkins here helping you from the wagon when you arrived. They've reported it for the reward." The room seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's feet. "No," she whispered. "No, it can't be." "I'm afraid it's true," Mr. Jenkins confirmed grimly. "Decker and his men were at our store yesterday, questioning Martha. She told them nothing, of course, but they didn't believe her. They'll be searching every farm and ranch in the area soon." "We need to move you tonight," Daniel said, his voice tight with urgency. "I have a place a line shack up in the high country. No one knows about it except me. You'll be safe there until we can get you on a wagon train west." "But the snow," James Wilkinson protested. "The trails to the high country are barely passable even in good weather." "I know a way," Daniel replied. "It's difficult but manageable. We need to leave now before Decker expands his search." Eleanor looked from one concerned face to another, reality crashing down upon her. Her brief taste of freedom was about to be snatched away. She would be on the run again, hiding like a criminal when she'd committed no crime. "No," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I won't run anymore," Daniel frowned. "Eleanor, there's no choice." "If Decker finds you, he won't stop looking," she interrupted. "Not now. He'll follow me to Oregon, to California, to the ends of the earth if necessary. Not because he loves me, but because I'm his property and Harrison Decker doesn't relinquish what he considers his." "What are you suggesting?" Mrs. Wilkinson asked. Eleanor took a deep breath. "I need to confront him, end this once and for all." A chorus of protests erupted from around the room, but it was Daniel's quiet voice that silenced them all. "She's right," he said, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "Decker won't stop. Men like him can't abide losing what they believe belongs to them. Running only delays the inevitable." "But confronting him is suicide," Mr. Jenkins objected. "You've seen what he's capable of, Mrs. Decker." "I have," Eleanor agreed, her hand unconsciously rising to her still healing lip. "But I've also seen what I'm capable of. I escaped him once. I can do it again, but permanently this time." Daniel crossed the room to stand before her, his expression intent. "What do you have in mind?" "A public confrontation," Eleanor replied. "Not alone, I'm not that foolish. But in Wheatland with witnesses, people who will hear the truth about Harrison Decker." "And then what?" Daniel challenged. "Even if people believe you, the law still considers you his wife. He has rights over you that no public shaming will erase." "Unless I'm no longer his wife," Eleanor said quietly. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications of her words sank in. "Divorce," Mrs. Wilkinson finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Wyoming territory, it's possible," Mr. Jenkins said slowly. The territory has some of the most progressive laws regarding women's rights, but it's still a difficult and lengthy process. And Decker would fight it every step of the way, Daniel added grimly. Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly. Then what option do I have? I won't go back to him. I'd rather die first. Daniel's expression hardened. It won't come to that. He turned to the others. We need time to think this through. Is there somewhere safe she can stay tonight at least? The old trapper's cabin on our north pasture, Robert Wilkinson suggested. It's not much, but it's warm enough with a fire, and it's the last place anyone would look. James Wilkinson nodded agreement. Robert can take you there now while there's still enough light to find the way. As the group made hasty preparations for Eleanor's departure, Daniel pulled her aside. I don't like this, he said in a low voice. Confronting Decker is too dangerous. More dangerous than spending my life looking over my shoulder, Eleanor countered. I want to be free, Daniel, truly free. His expression softened. I know, and you deserve that freedom. He broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you. The raw emotion in his voice made Eleanor's heart skip. She reached out impulsively, her fingers brushing his. Then help me. Help me find a way to end this that doesn't involve running forever. Daniel's hand turned, capturing hers. I will, I promise. The trapper's cabin was little more than a one-room shack with a stone fireplace and a narrow cot. But after Robert got the fire going and left with promises to return in the morning, Eleanor found it surprisingly comfortable. Or perhaps her standards had simply adjusted after weeks of uncertainty. She was stoking the fire when a soft knock at the door startled her. Heart racing, she grabbed the iron poker before cautiously approaching the door. Who's there? She called. It's Daniel. Relief flooded through her as she unbolted the door to find him standing in the moonlit snow, his breath visible in the cold air. What are you doing here? I thought you were staying at the main house. Couldn't sleep, he admitted, stepping inside when she moved aside. Kept thinking about what you said, about ending this once and for all. Eleanor closed the door against the night chill. Have you come up with a solution? Daniel unbuttoned his coat but didn't remove it. Maybe it's unorthodox and risky. I'm listening. He paced the small cabin, organizing his thoughts. Wyoming territory grants divorce on grounds of cruelty or abandonment. With the bruises you still bear and witnesses to your flight, you have a case for the former. But as you said, Harrison would fight it, Eleanor reminded him. And the proceedings would take time we don't have. Yes, Daniel agreed. But there's another way to sever the bond between you and Decker, a way that would give you immediate protection under the law. Eleanor's brow furrowed in confusion. What way? Daniel stopped pacing, turning to face her directly. Marriage. I don't understand. I'm already married. Not to Harrison Decker, Daniel clarified. To me. Eleanor stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? Hear me out, Daniel said quickly. If we were to marry a civil ceremony, quick and legal, it would create a legal complication that even Decker couldn't easily untangle. But I'm already married, Eleanor repeated, struggling to follow his logic. Any second marriage would be invalid. Not if your first husband was believed dead when you were married, Daniel countered. It's a legal gray area that would take courts years to resolve, years during which you would remain legally under my protection, not Decker's. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the cot, mind reeling. You're suggesting a fraud. I'm suggesting a shield, Daniel corrected, one that would allow you time to build a case for divorce from Decker while remaining beyond his legal reach. And what of you? Eleanor asked softly. What do you gain from this arrangement? Daniel's expression grew serious. The satisfaction of helping someone who deserves a chance at happiness, nothing more. You would bind yourself to me legally, risk prosecution for bigamy, all for satisfaction? Yes, his voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. Eleanor stood, moving to the fire to hide the confusion of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. This man, whom she'd known for mere weeks, was offering to place himself between her and harm, to legally bind his life to hers for no reason other than to see her safe. It would be a marriage in name only, Daniel continued when she remained silent. Once Decker is no longer a threat, we could quietly dissolve it. You would be free to live as you choose. Eleanor turned to face him. And if it doesn't work, if Harrison challenges the marriage? Then we fight him in court, Daniel replied simply. Every day the case drags on is another day you're beyond his reach, and eventually the truth of his cruelty would become public record. Even a man of Decker's influence can't survive that kind of scrutiny unscathed. It was madness. Complete madness, and yet, Eleanor found herself considering it, not just as an escape from Harrison, but as a step toward something she'd begun to want with an intensity that frightened her. "This is not a decision to make lightly," she said finally. "I need time to think." Daniel nodded. "Of course, but not too much time. Decker is closing in." "Stay," Eleanor found herself saying. "It's too cold to go back to the main house now. You can have the cot, I'll take the floor." "I'll take the floor," Daniel countered firmly. "You need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Eleanor accepted the compromise. As she settled onto the narrow cot, she watched Daniel make a pallet near the fire, his movements efficient and unobtrusive. "Daniel," she called softly after he had stretched out on his makeshift bed. "Thank you for everything." In the firelight, she saw the curve of his mouth as he smiled. "Sleep well, Eleanor," but sleep proved elusive as her mind churned with the implications of Daniel's proposal. Marriage. Even in name only, the word carried weight, a promise, a bond, a future entwined with another's. After her experience with Harrison, the very idea should have terrified her. And yet, when she imagined standing beside Daniel, speaking vows she'd once believed sacred, there was no fear, only a strange, fluttering hope. Dawn found her still awake, a decision forming in her heart that both exhilarated and terrified her. The next morning, as promised, Robert Wilkinson returned to the trapper's cabin with fresh supplies and news that sent a chill through Eleanor's heart. "Harrison Decker arrived in Wheatland last night," the young man reported grimly. "He's staying at the hotel, but his men are already questioning folks all over town." Daniel, who had been tending the fire, straightened at this news. "How many men?" "4 that I saw," Robert replied. "Mean-looking bunch, carrying sidearms and not bothering to be subtle about it." Eleanor's hands trembled as she poured coffee into tin cups. "How long before they start searching the outlying farms?" "A day, maybe 2. Robert accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Pa sent word to Judge Hamilton. He'll be passing through on circuit in 3 days. If you still want to, proceed with what you discussed last night." Daniel's eyes met Eleanor's across the small cabin. "That's Eleanor's decision to make." She took a steadying breath. "If we do this marriage, what happens afterward? Where would we go?" "North," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I have contacts in Montana Territory. We could start fresh there where Decker's influence doesn't reach. As husband and wife." The words slipped out before she could stop them. A flush crept up Daniel's neck. "As whatever you wish us to be, the arrangement is for your protection, nothing more." Robert cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should get back before I'm missed." "Pa says to tell you the offer still stands if you want to make for the high country instead. He'll provide supplies." After the young man departed, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Eleanor moved to the small window, watching snowflakes begin to fall outside. "What if," she said quietly, "I wished for more than protection?" Behind her, she heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath. "Eleanor, I've spent 3 years being owned," she continued, still facing the window, "treated as property, as less than human. I swore if I ever escaped, I would never again bind myself to a man." She turned to face him. "But with you, it feels different. You offer me protection without demanding possession. You see me as a person, not a prize." Daniel moved toward her, his expression a complex mixture of hope and caution. "I would never presume, I know," she interrupted gently. "That's why I trust you. That's why I can stand here and say that if we do this, if we marry to thwart Harrison, I don't want it to be merely a legal fiction." He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" "I'm saying that in the short time I've known you, Daniel Blackburn, I've begun to feel things I thought Harrison had destroyed forever. Hope, trust, and yes, affection." She swallowed hard, gathering her courage. "I'm saying that if we marry, I would want it to be real, not just on paper." Daniel's hand rose hesitantly to her cheek, his touch feather light. Are you certain after everything you've endured because of everything I've endured? She corrected. I know the difference now between possession and partnership, between cruelty and kindness. Her voice dropped to a whisper, between fear and love. The word hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly but both feeling its weight. If we do this, Daniel said finally, his voice rough with emotion, there's no going back. Decker will come after us with everything he has. I know. Eleanor's hand rose to cover his where it rested against her cheek. But I'm tired of running, tired of fear dictating my choices. If there's a chance, even a small one, for a different kind of life, I want to take it. With you. Daniel's other arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. Then say the word, Eleanor Decker, and I will stand beside you against whatever comes. Yes, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips gently against his. The word is yes. The kiss deepened, a promise exchanged without words. When they finally parted, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. 3 days until the judge arrives, he murmured. We need to be ready. Ready for a wedding, Eleanor said, a smile playing at her lips, and ready for war. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of secret preparation. James Wilkinson rode to Wheatland to confirm the judge's arrival and to file the necessary paperwork for a civil ceremony, careful to avoid Harrison Decker and his men. Sarah Wilkinson altered one of her own dresses for Eleanor, a simple blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. Daniel split his time between the trapper's cabin and scouting the surrounding area, ensuring they had escape routes planned should Decker's men discover their location before the judge arrived. Each night, he returned to Eleanor with news from town and a growing certainty in his heart that what had begun as a desperate gambit was transforming into something profound and genuine. On the morning of the 3rd day, Robert Wilkinson arrived at the cabin with Judge Hamilton, a stern-faced man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes and a reputation for fair dealing. The judge listened impassively as Daniel and Eleanor explained their situation, omitting only the fact that Eleanor's first marriage remained legally intact. You understand the seriousness of the vows you're about to take, the judge asked, looking between them. We do, Your Honor, Daniel replied, his hand finding Eleanor's. And you, young lady, the judge continued, his gaze softening slightly as it fell on Eleanor's still healing face. You enter into this union of your own free will, with all my heart, Eleanor answered steadily. The ceremony that followed was brief, but no less meaningful for its simplicity. Standing before the hearth in the small cabin, with only the Wilkinsons and Judge Hamilton as witnesses, Eleanor and Daniel exchanged vows that transformed them, in the eyes of the law, into husband and wife. By the authority vested in me by Wyoming territory, the judge concluded, I now pronounce you man and wife. May God bless this union. As Daniel bent to kiss his bride, a shout from outside shattered the moment, followed by the unmistakable sound of approaching horses. Decker, James Wilkinson said grimly, moving to the window. 4 riders, armed. Daniel's arm tightened protectively around Eleanor. Judge, I'm sorry to involve you in this, but say no more, the older man interrupted, his expression hardening. I've heard rumors about Harrison Decker. If what I suspect is true, I'll be glad to see justice done. The cabin door burst open, admitting a gust of cold air and snow, and Harrison Decker himself, flanked by 2 hard-faced men with hands hovering near their holsters. Eleanor instinctively pressed closer to Daniel, her whole body trembling at the sight of her first husband's cold, calculating eyes. Harrison was, as she remembered, impeccably dressed despite the weather, his blonde hair carefully styled, his handsome features arranged in an expression of wounded concern that she knew was entirely false. Eleanor, my darling, he exclaimed, ignoring everyone else in the room. Thank God you're safe. I've been out of my mind with worry. Step back, Mr. Decker, Judge Hamilton commanded, moving to stand between Harrison and the newlyweds. This is a private gathering. Harrison's gaze flickered to the judge, then to the Wilkinsons, before returning to Eleanor with narrowed suspicion. What's going on here? Eleanor, come here at once. It's time to go home. I am home, Eleanor replied, amazed at the steadiness of her own voice. "With my husband." Harrison's face darkened. "I am your husband, you foolish girl, whatever lies this. Cowboy has told you the lady is legally married to Mr. Blackburn," Judge Hamilton interrupted firmly. The ceremony was just completed, with proper witnesses and documentation. A muscle twitched in Harrison's jaw, the only outward sign of his rage, but one Eleanor recognized all too well. "Impossible. She is already married. To me." Eleanor Decker was declared missing and presumed dead after the blizzard last month, Daniel stated calmly. "A fact you yourself established when you posted notices seeking information about your lost wife." "This is absurd," Harrison sputtered, his composure slipping. "She's standing right here, very much alive." "Indeed she is," Judge Hamilton agreed, "and now legally wed to Mr. Blackburn." A most fortunate turn of events, considering the alternative. Harrison's hand moved toward the inside pocket of his coat. "I have documents proving my marriage to Eleanor. This charade will not stand." "Neither will your reputation once people learn the truth," Eleanor said, stepping forward despite Daniel's protective hand on her arm. "The truth about how you treat your beloved wife behind closed doors. No one will believe the hysterical claims of a woman who ran away from her rightful husband," Harrison sneered. "You're coming home with me, Eleanor, now, or I'll have this entire family arrested for kidnapping." "On what grounds?" Judge Hamilton challenged. "Mrs. Blackburn is here of her own free will as a legally married woman. You have no claim on her." Harrison's cold eyes swept the room, calculating. "This territory isn't big enough for you to hide from me," he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. "You think you're clever, but this changes nothing." "You belong to me, Eleanor. You always will." "No, Harrison," Eleanor replied, chin raised defiantly. "I belong to myself, and I choose to share my life with a man who treats me with respect and kindness." She stepped closer to Daniel, drawing strength from his presence. "You have no power over me anymore." For a moment, something dangerous flickered in Harrison's eyes, a glimpse of the violence that had always simmered beneath his polished exterior. His hand twitched toward his coat again, but a subtle shift in stance from Daniel and James Wilkinson, both clearly prepared for trouble, made him reconsider. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "Not by a long shot." With that, he turned on his heel and stalked from the cabin, his men following close behind. The sound of horses galloping away broke the tense silence that followed his departure. "He'll be back," Daniel said grimly, "with more men and possibly a legal challenge." "Let him come," Judge Hamilton replied, straightening his coat. "The marriage is legal and binding, and if Mrs. Blackburn wishes to file charges of abuse against her former husband, I'd be happy to hear that case as well." Eleanor's legs suddenly felt weak. She sank onto a chair, the full weight of what had just transpired crashing down upon her. She was married, truly married to Daniel, and she had stood up to Harrison for the first time without flinching. "What happens now?" she asked, looking up at the circle of concerned faces. "Now," Daniel said, kneeling before her and taking her hands in his, "we follow the plan. We leave for Montana tonight before Decker can regroup. You're welcome to stay at our place until dark," James Wilkinson offered. "We can have horses ready for you and supplies." Judge Hamilton nodded approval. "I'll return to Wheatland and ensure the marriage certificate is properly filed. If Decker attempts legal action, he'll find himself facing questions he'd rather not answer." As the others discussed logistics, Eleanor found herself studying Daniel's face, the strong lines of his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the determination in his expression as he planned their escape. This man was now her husband, her protector, her partner, and perhaps in time her love. Darkness had fallen by the time Eleanor and Daniel bid farewell to the Wilkinsons. Mounted on sturdy horses, with supplies for several days' journey packed in their saddlebags, they set out northward, following game trails that would keep them away from the main roads where Harrison's men might be watching. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. Eleanor rode close beside Daniel, their breath visible in the frigid air. Despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, despite the danger at their backs, a strange sense of peace had settled over her. For the first time in years, she was moving towards something rather than running away. "Are you warm enough?" Daniel asked, his voice low in the quiet night. "Yes," Eleanor replied, smiling beneath her scarf. "Strangely enough, I am." They rode in companionable silence for several hours, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and to check their bearings by the stars. Daniel knew these mountains well, having trapped and hunted through them for years, and he guided them unerringly through passes and valleys that would have confounded less experienced travelers. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles and had begun the climb into the higher country that would eventually lead them across the border into Montana territory. As the sun rose, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose, Daniel called a halt in a sheltered grove of pines. "We should rest here for a few hours," he said, dismounting and helping Eleanor down from her horse. "The animals need it, and so do we." They made a small, nearly smokeless fire, careful not to create a signal that might be spotted from below. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Eleanor found herself studying Daniel's profile, illuminated by the pink light of dawn. "What will we do in Montana?" she asked. "Where will we go?" Daniel added a small branch to the fire before answering. "I have a friend in Helena, another veteran who came west after the war. He owns a livery stable and has been asking me to join him in the business for years." He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "Would that suit you? Life in a small city?" After 3 years of isolation in Harrison's mansion, any life with people around would be welcome, Eleanor replied honestly. "But what matters more is that we'll be together." Daniel's expression softened. "I've been meaning to ask about that, about us." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "What you said before about wanting our marriage to be real, did you mean it, or was it just the emotion of the moment?" Eleanor set aside her tin cup and moved to sit beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "I meant every word," she said softly. "I know it's fast, impossibly fast. We've known each other such a short time, but—" She took a deep breath. "When I'm with you, I feel safe, not just physically, but here." She pressed a hand to her heart. "You make me feel valued, respected, seen." "Because you are," Daniel replied simply. "You're the bravest person I've ever known, Eleanor, the strongest," she laughed softly. "I don't feel strong most of the time. That's what makes it true courage," he said, reaching to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Being afraid but doing what needs doing anyway." His hand lingered on her cheek, warm against her cold skin. Eleanor leaned into his touch, her eyes meeting his. "Daniel," she whispered, "I think I could love you, given time." The corner of his mouth lifted in a gentle smile. "I think I'm already halfway there with you." He bent his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that started tender but quickly deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. Eleanor's arms wound around his neck as she pressed closer, her heart racing with something other than fear for the first time in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "We should get some rest," he murmured. "We've a long journey ahead." They slept for a few hours, huddled close beneath shared blankets for warmth before continuing their journey northward. The terrain grew more challenging as they climbed higher into the mountains, but the horses were sure-footed, and Daniel's knowledge of the landscape kept them on safe paths. By nightfall of the second day, they had crossed into Montana territory, though the border existed only on maps, not in the rugged wilderness through which they traveled. They made camp in a natural shelter formed by a rocky overhang, building a slightly larger fire now that they were reasonably certain Harrison's men couldn't have followed them this far. As they sat side by side watching the flames dance, Eleanor found herself thinking of the future, a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in years. "Tell me about your friend in Helena," she said. "The one with the livery stable." Daniel added another log to the fire. "Michael Thompson. We served together in the 6th Wisconsin. Good man, lost his left arm at Gettysburg but didn't let it slow him down much. Came west same time I did, but he had a clearer vision of what he wanted." He chuckled softly. "Always said I'd end up working with him eventually once I got tired of living like a hermit." And did you get tired of it? Daniel considered the question. Not exactly. I valued the solitude. After the war, I needed space, quiet, time to sort through things in my head. He glanced at her. But there were moments, especially in winter, when the silence got too loud. Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. I felt that way in Harrison's house, surrounded by servants, by fine things, but utterly alone. You won't be alone again, Daniel promised, his hand finding hers. Not as long as I'm breathing. They continued their journey at first light, pushing the horses as much as they dared through the difficult terrain. By Eleanor's calculation, they were still at least 3 days' ride from Helena, assuming the weather held and they encountered no other obstacles. But as they crested a ridge late that afternoon, Daniel suddenly reined in his mount, his posture alert. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, instantly tense. Daniel pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from a valley below them. "That's no campfire, too big, too steady, that's a chimney." "Is that unusual, this far up, in winter?" "Yes," he frowned, scanning the area. "There's a mining claim down there, abandoned years ago. Someone's taken up residence." "Could it be a trap? Harrison's men?" Daniel shook his head. "Not likely, they wouldn't know about this route." "And they couldn't have gotten ahead of us." He studied the smoke thoughtfully. "Might be trappers or prospectors trying their luck in the old mine. Either way, we should approach carefully." They left the horses secured in a stand of pine trees and made their way down the slope on foot, moving silently through the snow. As they neared the source of the smoke, they could make out a small cabin, crude but sturdy, with light glowing from its single window. Daniel motioned for Eleanor to stay back while he circled the structure, checking for signs of danger. When he returned to her side, his expression was puzzled. "There's just one set of tracks," he whispered, "and they're small, like a child's or a woman's." Before they could decide on a course of action, the cabin door creaked open, and a figure stepped out, a young woman, barely more than a girl, with a shotgun held confidently in her hands. "That's far enough," she called, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "State your business or move along." Daniel straightened, keeping his hands visible. "We're travelers, miss, heading to Helena. Saw your smoke and wanted to make sure everything was all right up here." The girl, she couldn't be older than 17 or 18, regarded them suspiciously. "You don't look like trouble," she said finally, "but I've been wrong before." "We don't mean any harm," Eleanor added, stepping forward. "We've been riding for days, just wanted to know if we were near any settlement." The girl's stance relaxed slightly as she took in Eleanor's presence. "Nearest town's Fort Shaw, about 30 miles northwest," she replied. "Nothing else around here except my pa's claim." "Your father's claim?" Daniel asked. "Is he here?" A shadow passed over the girl's young face. "Died last month, pneumonia. I've been working the claim since." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Daniel, both thinking the same thing. This girl was far too young to be alone in the wilderness, especially in winter. "I'm Eleanor Blackburn," she said gently. "This is my husband, Daniel. What's your name?" "Sarah," the girl replied after a moment's hesitation. "Sarah Mitchell?" "Well, Miss Mitchell," Daniel said, "we'd be grateful for the chance to warm up by your fire before continuing our journey. We've got food to share if you're amenable." Sarah studied them for a long moment before lowering her shotgun. "Come on in, then." "But I'll keep this close, just the same." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly neat, if sparsely furnished. A stone hearth dominated one wall, with a cooking pot suspended over the flames. A narrow cot occupied one corner, a rough table and 2 chairs another. Mining tools hung from pegs on the walls, alongside a few personal items, a faded daguerreotype, a woman's shawl, a child's wooden toy. "Been here long?" Daniel asked as he and Eleanor settled on the floor near the fire, respecting Sarah's territory. "Pa staked the claim 3 years back," the girl replied, setting the shotgun within easy reach but keeping a wary distance. "Gold played out quick, but he was too stubborn to move on, said there was more to be found if we just dug in the right spot." She shrugged thin shoulders. "We were fixing to head to Helena come spring. Then the cough took him." "You've been alone all this time?" Eleanor asked, heart aching for the girl. "I manage," Sarah said simply. Daniel reached into his saddlebag, retrieving some of their supplies. "We have coffee, jerky, and some hardtack." Not much of a feast, but we're happy to share. Sarah's eyes lit up at the mention of coffee, clearly a luxury she'd been without, but pride kept her from showing too much enthusiasm. I've got a rabbit stew on the fire, she offered in return, caught two in my snares yesterday. As they shared the simple meal, the tension gradually eased. Sarah revealed that she was indeed only 17, the oldest of 5 children. Her mother and siblings had remained in Missouri while her father sought his fortune in the West, planning to send for them once he struck it rich. Never happened, of course, she said matter-of-factly. Pa sent what he could, but it was never enough. Then we got word last year that Ma and the little ones had moved on with my uncle to Oregon. No forwarding address. So you stayed with your father, Eleanor surmised. Sarah nodded. Wasn't much choice, and Pa needed me. He wasn't much good at looking after himself. As the evening wore on, Eleanor found herself increasingly concerned about this brave, lonely girl. The thought of leaving her to face the Montana winter alone seemed unconscionable. When Sarah stepped outside briefly to bring in more firewood, Eleanor turned to Daniel. We can't leave her here, she whispered urgently. Daniel nodded, his expression troubled. I know, but we can't force her to come with us either. She's got her pride. There must be something we can do. When Sarah returned, arms laden with split logs, Daniel cleared his throat. Miss Mitchell, Eleanor and I have been talking. We're heading to Helena to start a new life there. I've got a friend with a business and prospects are good. He glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragement. We'd be honored if you'd consider coming with us. Sarah's expression immediately closed. I don't need charity. It's not charity, Eleanor said quickly. It's an opportunity for all of us. She leaned forward earnestly. Daniel's friend needs help with his livery stable. You clearly know how to work hard and take care of yourself, and I— She hesitated, then plunged ahead. I'm hoping to open a small school eventually. I could use an assistant. A school, Sarah repeated, a flicker of interest crossing her face before she masked it. I never had much schooling myself. All the more reason to join us, Eleanor replied. You could further your own education while helping others. Sarah poked at the fire, clearly wrestling with conflicting emotions. What about Pa's claim I can't just abandon it? You said yourself the gold's played out, Daniel pointed out gently, and you were planning to leave in spring anyway. But all our things, Pa's things, we can take what matters most, Eleanor assured her. The rest, she shrugged. They're just things, Sarah. Not worth your life if winter worsens. Sarah was silent for a long time, staring into the flames. Finally, she raised her eyes to meet Eleanor's gaze. When would we leave? She asked. First light, Daniel replied. If that suits you, Sarah nodded once decisively. I'll be ready. The journey to Helena took 5 more days, slowed somewhat by Sarah's presence but enriched by her knowledge of the terrain and her surprisingly buoyant spirit, which emerged as she grew more comfortable with her new companions. By the time they reached the outskirts of the growing town, a bond had formed between the 3 travelers, an improvised family born of shared hardship and mutual respect. Helena in 1879 was a bustling place, having evolved from a gold camp to a proper town with boardwalks, brick buildings, and even a few stretches of gas-lit street. Daniel led them directly to Thompson's livery at the eastern edge of town, where they were greeted enthusiastically by Michael Thompson himself, a barrel-chested man with a missing left arm and a booming laugh that made even the wary Sarah smile. Daniel Blackburn, as I live and breathe. Michael exclaimed, pumping Daniel's hand vigorously. Finally decided to join civilization, have you? And with a wife and daughter, no less. You've been holding out on me, you old wolf. Daniel laughed, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Not quite, Mike. This is my wife, Eleanor. We were recently married. A shadow crossed his face. It's a long story and not all of it pleasant. And this is Sarah Mitchell, who we met on our journey. She's joining us here in Helena, but she's not our daughter. Michael sobered, reading the seriousness in Daniel's expression. Well, any friend of Daniel's is a friend of mine. Come in, all of you. Mary's got supper on and there's plenty to go around. The Thompson home, attached to the livery stable, was warm and welcoming. Mary Thompson, a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes, immediately took Eleanor and Sarah under her wing, providing hot water for washing and clean clothes to change into while their travel-worn garments were laundered. Later that evening, after Sarah had gone to bed in the small room the Thompsons had provided, Daniel and Eleanor sat with their hosts in the cozy parlor, explaining the circumstances that had brought them to Helena. "This Harrison Decker sounds like a real piece of work," Michael growled when they'd finished their tale. "You did right getting her away from him, but we may have brought trouble to your door," Daniel said gravely. "Decker isn't the type to let go easily. He may come looking for us even here." "Let him come," Michael replied, his jaw set stubbornly. "Helena's not Cheyenne. He'll find no allies here." "All the same," Mary interjected, "we should be cautious. Perhaps use your married name sparingly at first, Eleanor, until you're settled and established." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the woman's practical thinking. "That seems wise, though I admit I'm still getting used to being Mrs. Blackburn myself." Daniel's hand found hers, squeezing gently. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Mary, who smiled approvingly. "You'll stay with us until you find a place of your own," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. "And Daniel can start at the livery tomorrow if he's of a mind to." "I am indeed," Daniel confirmed, "and Eleanor was a teacher before everything." "She hopes to open a small school eventually." Mary's face lit up. "A school? That's wonderful news. Helena has grown so quickly we're in desperate need of more teachers. The town council just approved funding for a new schoolhouse last month. A proper schoolhouse." Eleanor asked, excitement kindling within her. "With desks and books and everything?" "Well, the building at least," Mary replied with a laugh. "The furnishings and books might take some fundraising, but the need is certainly there." As the conversation continued, plans taking shape for their new life in Helena, Eleanor found herself watching Daniel, the animation in his face as he discussed business prospects with Michael, the warmth in his eyes when he glanced her way, the gentle strength in his hands as he gestured to emphasize a point. This man was her husband, not by force or manipulation as Harrison had been, but by choice, by mutual respect and growing affection. The realization filled her with a quiet joy that pushed back the shadows of her past. Later, as they prepared for bed in the small guest room the Thompsons had provided, Eleanor found herself suddenly shy. This would be their first night truly alone together as husband and wife, without the immediacy of danger or the presence of others to create distance between them. Daniel seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I can sleep on the floor," he offered, arranging extra blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed. "You take the bed." "No," Eleanor said softly, surprising herself with her own certainty. "That's not necessary." Daniel straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, I meant what I said before. I expect nothing from this marriage that you're not ready to give." She crossed the room to stand before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "What if I am ready? What if I want you to be real in every way?" Daniel's breath caught audibly. His hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "Are you certain, after everything you've been through?" "Because of everything I've been through," Eleanor corrected, leaning into his touch. "You've shown me what a true partner should be, Daniel, someone who respects my choices, who sees me as a person, not a possession." She stepped closer, her hands coming to rest on his chest. "I choose you, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because of who you are." Something broke in Daniel's expression, then a wall coming down, revealing the depth of emotion he had kept carefully contained. "Eleanor," he breathed, her name a benediction on his lips. And then he was kissing her, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her against him with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Unlike their previous kisses, which had been brief and tentative, this one deepened quickly. Years of loneliness and longing channeled into a connection that left them both breathless. Eleanor's hands slid up to tangle in Daniel's hair as she pressed closer, marveling at the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I never thought," he murmured, "after the war, after everything. I never thought I'd find someone who made me feel whole again." "Nor I," Eleanor whispered, understanding perfectly, "but here we are." Here we are, he agreed, a smile spreading across his face that transformed his features, making him almost boyish in his joy. Husband and wife. Husband and wife, she echoed, leading him toward the bed that they would share, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as partners choosing to build a life together. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor, Daniel, and Sarah settled into life in Helena with a sense of cautious optimism. Daniel took to work at the livery stable as if he'd been born to it, his natural way with horses and customers quickly making him indispensable to Michael's growing business. Sarah, after some initial resistance, enrolled in the town's existing school to continue her education, while also helping Mary Thompson with her garden and household tasks. Eleanor, meanwhile, threw herself into plans for her own small school. With Mary's connections in the community, she secured an interview with the town council and presented her credentials carefully edited to avoid any mention of Harrison Decker. Impressed by her knowledge and passion, the council offered her a position teaching at the new schoolhouse, scheduled to open in the spring. In the evenings, the expanded Thompson household would gather around the dinner table, sharing stories and plans for the future. For Eleanor, these simple domestic moments were precious beyond measure, a stark contrast to the cold, formal dinners she'd endured with Harrison, where she'd been expected to remain silent unless spoken to. As winter gave way to spring, Daniel and Eleanor found a small house to rent on the outskirts of town, a modest 2-bedroom structure with a vegetable garden out back and enough room in the yard for the mare Daniel had purchased for Eleanor's use. Sarah, now firmly established as a surrogate daughter to both couples, divided her time between the Thompson and Blackburn households, her initial wariness replaced by a blossoming confidence. The new schoolhouse opened in May with a celebration that drew most of the town. Eleanor, standing at the front of the freshly painted classroom, felt a sense of purpose and belonging she had feared lost forever. Daniel watched from the back of the room, his eyes filled with pride and something deeper, a love that had grown steadily over their months together, nurtured by shared challenges and quiet joys. Summer brought news from Wyoming territory via a letter from Mrs. Jenkins, carefully forwarded through several intermediaries to protect their location. Harrison Decker had indeed challenged the validity of Eleanor's marriage to Daniel, but had been stymied by Judge Hamilton's staunch defense of the union's legality. More significantly, rumors had begun to circulate about Decker's treatment of his late wife, fueled by the testimony of former servants who, with Eleanor gone, found the courage to speak of what they had witnessed. His business associates are distancing themselves, Mrs. Jenkins wrote. And there's talk that the bank may call in some of his loans. It seems your escape has cost him more than just his pride. The letter brought Eleanor a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that Harrison was facing consequences, but also renewed fear that his diminished circumstances might drive him to seek her out with even greater determination. Daniel, sensing her unease, wrapped his arms around her from behind as she stood at the kitchen window, staring unseeingly at the garden. "We're safe here," he murmured against her hair, "and getting safer every day as we put down roots." "I know," Eleanor sighed, leaning back against his solid chest, "but sometimes I still wake up afraid, thinking I'm back there with him." "Then I'll just have to hold you closer," Daniel replied, turning her gently in his arms to face him, "until those memories fade." "They're fading already," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "Every day with you pushes him further into the past." Their peaceful existence was shaken in late August when a stranger arrived at Thompson's livery, asking pointed questions about a couple who had arrived from Wyoming territory the previous winter. Michael, true to his word, claimed no knowledge of such people, but the incident was enough to put them all on alert. "Could be nothing," Daniel said that evening as he and Eleanor discussed the matter in the privacy of their bedroom. "Could be one of Decker's men testing the waters." "Or it could be Harrison himself getting closer," Eleanor replied, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "What if he finds us, Daniel? What then?" Daniel sat beside her on the edge of the bed, taking her hands in his. Then we face him together. You're not alone anymore, Eleanor. And you're not without resources or allies. He squeezed her hands gently. But let's not borrow trouble. Helena's growing every day. New people arrive constantly. This might be nothing more than coincidence. But 2 days later, as Eleanor was walking home from the school where she'd been preparing for the fall term, she caught sight of a familiar figure standing outside the town's most expensive hotel, tall, blonde, impeccably dressed. Harrison Decker had found her. Eleanor froze mid-step, blood rushing in her ears. For a terrible moment, she thought he had seen her. But Harrison's attention was focused on the man beside him, one of the town councilmen, gesturing enthusiastically as he showed Helena's prominent visitor around. Moving quickly, Eleanor ducked into the nearest shop, a milliner's, and positioned herself behind a display of hats, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the establishment could hear it. "Are you all right, Mrs. Blackburn?" the shopkeeper asked, concern evident in her voice. "You've gone white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Eleanor managed, forcing a smile, "just a bit lightheaded from the heat. Would you mind if I sat for a moment?" "Of course, dear. Let me fetch you some water." From her seat near the back of the shop, Eleanor could see through the window without being easily spotted from the street. Harrison and the councilman were still there, apparently deep in conversation. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only minutes, they moved on, walking in the direction of the town hall. Eleanor waited until they were well out of sight before thanking the shopkeeper and hurrying home, taking back alleys and side streets to avoid being seen. Daniel wasn't due home from the livery for hours yet, but she found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing vegetables for the evening meal. "You look like you've seen a ghost," the girl observed, setting down her knife. "What's happened?" "Harrison is here," Eleanor said, sinking into a chair, "in Helena. I saw him on Main Street with Councilman Porter." Sarah's eyes widened. "Your first husband, the one who—" She trailed off, not needing to finish the thought. Eleanor had shared enough of her past for Sarah to understand the danger Harrison represented. "Yes. And if he's with Porter, he's probably presenting himself as a potential investor or businessman looking to establish connections here." Eleanor pressed her hands to her temples, thinking frantically, "We need to warn Daniel and the Thompsons." "I'll go," Sarah offered immediately, already reaching for her shawl. "You stay here out of sight." "No," Eleanor said firmly, rising from the chair with renewed determination. "No more hiding, no more running." She squared her shoulders. "Harrison's presence changes nothing about who I am now or what I've built here. I won't let him take that from me." Sarah regarded her with a mixture of concern and admiration. "What will you do?" "First, we'll send word to Daniel, then I'm going to speak with Judge Morris." Eleanor's mind was working rapidly now, fear giving way to resolve. It's time to end this once and for all. Judge William Morris had been one of Eleanor's earliest supporters in Helena, impressed by her intelligence and dedication to education. His wife, Beatrice, had become a friend and vocal advocate for the new school. If anyone in Helena had both the legal authority and the personal investment to help her, it was the Morris family. Sarah was dispatched to the livery with a carefully worded note for Daniel, while Eleanor changed into her most respectable dress, a deep blue that Mary Thompson had helped her sew, and made her way to the judge's home on the edge of town. Beatrice Morris received her warmly, concerned by the obvious distress beneath Eleanor's composed exterior. When the judge returned home an hour later, Eleanor laid out the entire truth of her situation: her marriage to Harrison, the abuse she had suffered, her escape with Daniel's help, and the legal fiction of her death that had allowed her second marriage. "It's a complicated situation, legally speaking," Judge Morris said thoughtfully when she had finished, "but not without precedent, especially in the territories where formal divorce proceedings can be difficult to undertake." "What can I do?" Eleanor asked. "Harrison is here in Helena. It's only a matter of time before he discovers me." "Perhaps that's for the best," the judge replied, raising a hand to forestall her protest. "Not for him to find you unawares, but for a controlled confrontation on your terms with witnesses present." "What are you suggesting?" Beatrice asked her husband. "A hearing. Formal and public, Mrs. Blackburn Eleanor can petition for a legal confirmation of her second marriage and a retroactive dissolution of her first on grounds of cruelty. The judge's expression hardened. From what you've described, there would be ample evidence to support such a petition. Would I have to face him, in court? Eleanor's voice wavered slightly at the thought. Yes, Judge Morris replied honestly, but not alone, and not without protection. By the time Daniel arrived at the Morris home, having received Eleanor's message and rushed to her side, the outline of a plan had taken shape. Judge Morris would convene a special hearing the following afternoon, ostensibly to address matters of property title, a common enough proceeding that would not raise suspicions. Eleanor would file her petition that morning, and Harrison would be served with a summons immediately thereafter. He'll be furious, Eleanor warned, and Harrison's fury is dangerous. He'll be in a public courtroom surrounded by people who have come to know and respect you, Judge Morris assured her. Any display of the temper you describe would only strengthen your case. Daniel, who had remained silent during much of the planning, finally spoke. What do you need from me? Your testimony, the judge replied, and your continued support for your wife. This won't be easy for either of you. Daniel's hand found Eleanor's, his grip firm and reassuring. She won't face this alone. Not now, not ever. That night, as word spread quietly among their closest friends about the confrontation to come, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She stood at the bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit garden when Daniel's arms encircled her from behind. Having second thoughts, he asked softly. Eleanor leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. No, just remembering. The last time I faced Harrison directly, I was running for my life through a snowstorm. And now you're standing your ground with the law and the community behind you. Daniel's voice held a note of pride. You've come a long way, Eleanor Blackburn. She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. We've come a long way, together. She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, pouring into the gesture all the love and gratitude that words seemed inadequate to express. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. Daniel's arms tightened around her. Many more to come, he promised. Many, many more. The courthouse was unusually crowded the following afternoon, word having spread that something of significance was to take place. Eleanor sat at a table at the front of the room, Daniel beside her, both of them dressed in their best clothes. Behind them sat the Thompsons, Sarah, and several other friends and colleagues who had come to show support. Judge Morris entered precisely at 2 o'clock, the room rising as he took his seat at the bench. Be seated, he instructed, then shuffled through the papers before him with deliberate calm. We have a petition before this court today from Mrs. Eleanor Blackburn, formerly Eleanor Decker, requesting formal recognition of her current marriage and dissolution of her previous union on grounds of extreme cruelty. Is the petitioner present? Eleanor rose, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I am, Your Honor. And is Mr. Harrison Decker present as summoned by this court? A murmur ran through the crowded room as Harrison stood from his place at the back, his handsome face arranged in an expression of pained bewilderment. I am here, Your Honor, though I confess I am at a loss to understand these proceedings. My wife was reported missing, presumed dead, these many months past. That is among the matters we will address today, Judge Morris replied evenly. Please come forward, Mr. Decker. As Harrison made his way to the front of the courtroom, his eyes locked with Eleanor's for the first time in nearly 8 months. The flash of rage she glimpsed beneath his carefully composed features sent a shiver of fear through her, but she held her ground, refusing to look away. Mrs. Blackburn, please present your petition, Judge Morris instructed once Harrison was seated at the second table. For the next hour, Eleanor laid out her story, her marriage to Harrison at 19, the gradual escalation of his controlling behavior into physical abuse, her desperate flight into the Wyoming winter, and her rescue by Daniel Blackburn. She spoke clearly and without embellishment, describing the bruises, the isolation, the fear that had been her constant companion during 3 years of marriage to Harrison Decker. Throughout her testimony, Harrison sat in apparent shock, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief or leaning to whisper to the lawyer he had hastily retained that morning. But Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw, the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the table signs she had learned to recognize as harbingers of his rage. When she finished, Judge Morris turned to Harrison. "Mr. Decker, you have heard serious allegations against your character and conduct. How do you respond?" Harrison rose smoothly, his voice modulated to convey wounded dignity. "Your Honor, I can only express my profound shock at these fabrications. My wife for Eleanor is still legally my wife, despite this. Charade of a second marriage has always been of a nervous and imaginative disposition. I fear that the strain of our life together, combined with the influence of certain parties," here he cast a pointed glance at Daniel, "has led her to construct these fantastical accusations." "Are you denying that you struck your wife, Mr. Decker?" Judge Morris asked bluntly. Harrison's expression hardened momentarily before he regained control. "I am saying, Your Honor, that any physical contact between us was either accidental or greatly exaggerated in Eleanor's telling. I loved my wife dearly. I searched for months when she disappeared. I offered rewards for information leading to her recovery." His voice broke with apparently genuine emotion. "I mourned her, Your Honor, and yet here she sits, very much alive and clearly terrified of you," the judge observed. "That speaks volumes in itself. She is confused, Your Honor." "Manipulated?" At this, Daniel half rose from his seat, only Eleanor's restraining hand on his arm keeping him from confronting Harrison directly. "We will hear now from Mr. Daniel Blackburn," Judge Morris announced, bringing the exchange to a close. "The petitioner's current husband." Daniel's testimony was brief but powerful. He described finding Eleanor in the snow, her injuries, her fear, and the gradual revelation of the abuse she had suffered. He confirmed their marriage, performed by a circuit judge with proper witnesses, and their subsequent life in Helena. "And you were aware that Mrs. Blackburn was still legally married to Mr. Decker when you exchanged vows?" Judge Morris asked. "I was," Daniel admitted without hesitation. "But I believed then, as I believe now, that her safety took precedence over legal technicalities. And I believe that no true marriage existed between them, given the circumstances she endured." Judge Morris nodded thoughtfully. "The court will now hear from other witnesses." Over the next hour, a parade of Helena citizens came forward to testify to Eleanor and Daniel's character, their standing in the community, the visible happiness of their marriage. Sarah Mitchell spoke movingly of how the couple had rescued her from isolation and given her a chance at education and family. Mary Thompson described the bruises she had observed on Eleanor's body when the couple first arrived in Helena. Most damning of all was the surprise appearance of Abigail Carter, a former servant from the Decker household in Cheyenne, who had read about the hearing in a telegram sent by Mrs. Jenkins and had traveled day and night to reach Helena in time to testify. "I saw him strike her more times than I can count," Abigail stated flatly, her gaze never wavering from Harrison's increasingly thunderous face. "I heard her cries through the walls. I helped bathe her wounds when he was finished with her. And I was dismissed from service when I dared to express concern for her welfare." By the time the testimony concluded, the mood in the courtroom had shifted decisively against Harrison Decker. Even his hastily retained lawyer looked uncomfortable sitting beside him. "Mr. Decker," Judge Morris said finally, "do you wish to present any further defense or testimony before this court renders its decision?" Harrison rose slowly, his composure visibly cracking around the edges. "This entire proceeding is a travesty," he spat, abandoning the pretense of wounded dignity. "My wife is my property under the law. This man," he jabbed a finger toward Daniel, "stole what was mine. Their so-called marriage is nothing but adultery dressed up in legal language." A murmur of disapproval ran through the courtroom at his words. Judge Morris rapped his gavel once for silence. "Mr. Decker, I strongly advise you to moderate your tone and your language. but Harrison was beyond heeding such warnings. Months of frustrated searching, the public humiliation of the hearing, and the growing realization that he was losing control of the situation had pushed him past reason. "Eleanor belongs to me," he snarled, turning to face her directly. "And if she thinks this farce of a hearing changes anything, she's even more foolish than I thought. I will have what's mine." The threat hung in the air, naked and undisguised. Eleanor felt Daniel tense beside her, ready to intercept any move Harrison might make toward her. But Judge Morris's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That is quite enough, Mr. Decker. You have just demonstrated to this court precisely the attitude that Mrs. Blackburn described in her testimony." The judge set aside his papers and leaned forward, his expression stern. "Based on the evidence and testimony presented here today, I find in favor of the petitioner. Eleanor Blackburn's marriage to Harrison Decker is hereby dissolved on grounds of extreme cruelty, retroactive to the date of her departure from the marital home. Her subsequent marriage to Daniel Blackburn is recognized as legal and binding." A cheer erupted from the supporters seated behind Eleanor and Daniel. Harrison's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed, lunging toward Eleanor before his lawyer could restrain him. "You think you've won? I'll destroy you both before I let you make a fool of me." Two deputies moved quickly to intervene, positioning themselves between Harrison and the Blackburns. Judge Morris rapped his gavel sharply. "Mr. Decker, you are in contempt of this court. Deputies, escort Mr. Decker to a cell until he regains his composure. And inform him that any further threats against Mrs. Blackburn or her husband will result in criminal charges." As Harrison was led from the courtroom, still shouting threats, Eleanor felt a curious lightness spread through her body. It was over, truly over. Harrison no longer had any legal claim on her. She was free not just in fact but in law. Daniel's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her close. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You stood your ground, you won." Eleanor shook her head slightly. "We won," she corrected, turning to face the man who had saved her in more ways than one. Together. The celebration that followed at the Blackburn home that evening was jubilant, but tinged with caution. Everyone knew that Harrison Decker was not a man to accept defeat gracefully, court ruling or no court ruling. "He'll leave town soon enough," Michael Thompson predicted as the gathering began to wind down. "Men like that can't abide places where their true nature is known. He'll crawl back to Cheyenne to lick his wounds." "All the same, we'll keep an eye out," Daniel replied, his arm never leaving Eleanor's waist throughout the evening. "At least until we're certain he's gone." Their friends departed with promises of vigilance and support until only the Blackburns and Sarah remained in the small house that had become home. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they cleared away the last of the dishes. "Will we have to leave Helena?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "This is our home. We've built lives here, good lives. I won't let Harrison drive us away." "Besides," Daniel added with a wry smile, "running once was necessary. Running twice would start to look like a habit." Sarah laughed, some of the tension easing from her young face. "Well, I'm glad. I'd hate to have to get used to yet another town." After Sarah had retired to her room, Eleanor and Daniel sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the summer sky. The evening was peaceful, the distant sounds of the town settling down for the night, a reassuring backdrop to their quiet conversation. "Are you truly not afraid?" Daniel asked softly, his thumb tracing circles on the back of Eleanor's hand. "I'd be a fool not to be cautious," she admitted. "Harrison is dangerous, especially now that he's been publicly humiliated, but—" She turned to face Daniel, her expression serene in the gathering darkness. "I'm done letting fear rule my life. Done letting Harrison determine where I go and what I do." Daniel's free hand rose to cup her cheek. "Have I told you today how much I admire your courage?" Eleanor smiled, leaning into his touch. "I believe you mentioned it once or twice during the celebration, but I wouldn't object to hearing it again." "I admire your courage, Eleanor Blackburn," he obliged, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Almost as much as I love you." "And I love you," she replied, the words coming easily now after months of growing certainty. more than I ever thought possible after, everything. Their kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had grown between them first from necessity, then from friendship, and finally from a love that neither had been looking for, but both had embraced wholeheartedly. Harrison Decker remained in Helena for 3 more days, during which the Blackburns went about their business with cautious normalcy. Eleanor continued preparations for the fall school term, Daniel worked at the livery, and Sarah divided her time between helping both households and furthering her own education. On the morning of the 4th day, word reached them that Decker had boarded the eastbound stage, apparently headed back to Cheyenne. The news brought relief, but not complacency. Daniel still insisted on escorting Eleanor to and from the schoolhouse, and friends kept watch for any sign that Decker might have left men behind to cause trouble. But as days stretched into weeks with no incident, life gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm. The school year began with Eleanor teaching 28 eager students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Daniel and Michael expanded the livery business to include a small carriage service. Sarah, now 18, discovered a talent for numbers and began assisting Michael with the livery's accounts. Autumn painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, bringing with it harvest festivals and community gatherings that further cemented the Blackburns' place in Helena society. No longer the mysterious newcomers with a shadowy past, they were now simply neighbors, friends, respected members of a growing community. It was at the harvest dance in early October that Eleanor shared with Daniel news she had been keeping close for several weeks, news that brought a look of such joy to his face that she would remember it always. A baby. He repeated, as if unable to believe what he'd heard over the music and laughter of the dance. "You're certain?" Eleanor nodded, her own happiness reflected in her eyes. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Next spring, April or May, he thinks." Daniel swept her into an embrace that lifted her feet from the floor, heedless of the curious glances from nearby dancers. "A baby," he said again, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." The news spread quickly through their circle of friends, bringing a flurry of congratulations and offers of assistance. Sarah, initially startled by the prospect of yet another change to their household, soon warmed to the idea of a new addition to their unconventional family. "I could help with the baby while you're teaching," she offered one evening as the 3 of them sat planning the modifications they'd need to make to the small house. "At least until you find someone else. Or," Eleanor suggested carefully, "you could take over some of my classes." "You've learned so much this past year, Sarah. You have a real gift for teaching, especially with the younger children." The girl's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "You'd trust me with that. We trust you with everything," Daniel said simply. "Your family." As winter settled once more over Montana territory, bringing with it memories of the snowstorm that had changed all their lives, the Blackburn household prepared for both Christmas and the coming baby with equal enthusiasm. Daniel spent evenings carving a cradle from pine wood, his strong hands creating delicate details with surprising artistry. Eleanor sewed tiny garments, marveling at how different this pregnancy felt from her brief, frightening experience in the early days of her marriage, to Harrison, a pregnancy that had ended in miscarriage after one of his rages. "This time will be different," Daniel assured her when she confided her fears. "This child will know only love and safety, I promise you that." And Eleanor believed him, with a faith born of watching him keep every promise he had ever made to her. The new year of 1880 brought heavy snow and frigid temperatures, keeping most of Helena's residents close to home. News traveled slowly in such weather, which is why it was late January before word reached them of Harrison Decker's death. The news came via a letter from Mrs. Jenkins, forwarded through their established chain of intermediaries. Harrison had returned to Cheyenne a broken man, his business interests unraveling as former associates distanced themselves from his tarnished reputation. He had taken to drinking heavily, and on a bitterly cold night in December, he had been found frozen to death in an alley behind one of Cheyenne's less reputable establishments. "There is a certain poetic justice in his end," Mrs. Jenkins wrote. "That the cold should claim him as it nearly claimed you. Rest easy now, dear friends, your shadow is gone." Eleanor read the letter aloud to Daniel and Sarah that evening, her emotions too complex to easily name. Relief, certainly, a sense of final closure. But also a curious emptiness, not grief for the man who had caused her so much pain, but perhaps for the young woman she had been, with all her hopes and dreams, before Harrison had crushed them beneath his cruel hands. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked gently when she had finished reading. Eleanor placed a protective hand over her swelling abdomen, feeling the flutter of new life within. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "It's truly over now. We can look forward without looking back," and they did. With Harrison's shadow permanently lifted, the last lingering fear that had occasionally disrupted Eleanor's happiness dissolved like morning mist in sunshine. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed energy, worked alongside Daniel and Sarah to prepare their home for the baby, and allowed herself to fully embrace the joy of expecting a child with a man who cherished her. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it wildflowers on the hillsides and a softening of the landscape that seemed to reflect the softening of Eleanor's body as her time drew near. Dr. Wilson predicted a mid-April birth, but babies, as he reminded them with a smile, kept their own schedules. Daniel had just completed the final touches on the nursery, a small alcove adjoining their bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow and furnished with the cradle he had carved, a rocking chair from the Thompsons, and a chest of drawers that Sarah had helped sand and finish when Eleanor's labor began. It was a long, difficult birth, stretching through a day and night of Montana spring sunshine and starlight. Sarah ran messages between the Blackburn home and the livery, keeping Michael informed of progress, while Mary Thompson and Beatrice Morris attended Eleanor alongside the doctor. Daniel remained steadfast at his wife's side, his strength unwavering even as fear for her safety gnawed at his heart. "You're doing beautifully," he murmured, wiping her brow with a cool cloth as another contraction gripped her. "Just a little longer, love, almost there." In the pale light of early dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears of relief and joy to every eye in the room. "Doctor." Wilson placed the squalling infant on Eleanor's chest, where he immediately quieted, tiny fingers curling against her skin as if recognizing her as his safe harbor. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, his voice rough with emotion as he gazed down at his wife and child. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas James Blackburn Thomas, for Daniel's father, James for the man who had helped shelter Eleanor during her flight from Harrison. He had Daniel's dark hair and strong features, but Eleanor's blue eyes and determined chin. "A perfect blend of both of you," Mary Thompson declared as she rocked the infant later that day, giving the exhausted new parents a brief respite. "And such a good baby already, hardly a fuss out of him since he figured out where his next meal is coming from." The following weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and wonder-filled days as the Blackburns adjusted to life with their new addition. Daniel proved to be a natural father, as comfortable walking the floor with a fussing infant as he was breaking wild horses at the livery. Eleanor recovered her strength gradually, savoring the quiet moments of nursing her son while watching the spring unfold outside their bedroom window. Sarah, to everyone's surprise including her own, took to her role as honorary aunt with enthusiasm, happily minding Thomas while Eleanor rested or helping Daniel with household tasks that had previously fallen to his wife. The girl who had once been so fiercely independent now flourished as part of their unconventional family, her sharp intelligence finding outlet in both her continuing education and her increased responsibilities at the school. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, a new routine had established itself in the Blackburn household. Eleanor had returned to teaching 3 days a week, with Sarah taking over the other 2. Daniel had become Michael Thompson's full partner in the expanded livery business, which now included a small carriage-making operation that utilized Daniel's woodworking skills. And Thomas was growing into a cheerful, curious baby who delighted everyone who met him. "We should have a proper christening," Eleanor suggested one evening as the three adults sat on the porch, watching the summer sunset while Thomas slept peacefully in his cradle nearby. "Invite all our friends, celebrate properly." "A fine idea," Daniel agreed, his arm draped comfortably around her shoulders. "We have much to be thankful for." Indeed they did, Eleanor reflected as she leaned against her husband's solid strength. In the space of less than 2 years, she had journeyed from desperate flight through a snowstorm to this moment of perfect contentment, from a marriage of fear and pain to one of respect and love, from isolation to community, from helplessness to agency. The christening took place on a perfect September Sunday, with Michael and Mary Thompson standing as godparents while Judge Morris performed the ceremony. Afterward, the entire community gathered at the Blackburn home for a celebration that lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and enough food to feed half of Helena. As twilight fell, Eleanor found herself standing slightly apart from the festivities, watching Daniel waltz Sarah around the yard while baby Thomas was passed from admiring arms to admiring arms, the center of attention and clearly loving every moment. "You look happy," Beatrice Morris observed, joining Eleanor in her quiet observation. "It suits you." Eleanor smiled, her gaze never leaving her husband and son. "I am happy, more than I ever thought possible." "You've come a long way from that frightened young woman who appeared on our doorstep last summer," Beatrice noted. "You should be proud of what you've built here." "We built it together," Eleanor corrected gently. "Daniel and I and Sarah and friends like you and the judge." "I couldn't have done it alone." "Perhaps not," Beatrice conceded, "but you had the courage to try. That's rare and precious." As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Daniel found Eleanor still standing in the same spot, now with Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her gently against his side. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Blackburn." Eleanor smiled up at him, this man who had saved her in so many ways. "I was just thinking about snow," she said softly. "About how something so cold and dangerous brought me to something so warm and safe." Daniel's arm tightened around her. "I thank God for that snowstorm every day," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and for the brave woman who was running through it." "And I thank God for the cowboy who caught me," Eleanor replied, turning her face up for a proper kiss, "and kept his promise of protection." As the last guests departed and Sarah began tidying up the remains of the feast, Daniel and Eleanor stood together in the yard, their son between them, gazing up at the first stars appearing in the evening sky. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility, a future built on the foundation of that fateful night in the Wyoming snow, when a desperate flight had led, improbably, to lasting love. And in that moment, with the man she loved at her side and their child in her arms, Eleanor knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in the hearts of those who loved her, and in the strength she had discovered within herself along the way.